On a gray October morning in 2025, the bells of Buckingham Palace tolled not for celebration but sorrow. The announcement that followed was one that silenced a nation. King Charles III was losing his battle with cancer. The words, though carefully measured, carried a tremor of inevitability. Britain's monarch, once so full of resolve, so determined to reign with quiet purpose, was fading. It had been 18 months since the palace first confirmed that Charles was ill, the type of cancer carefully shielded from public curiosity. Yet whispers had long filled the corridors of Westminster and Windsor alike. The king, now 76, had grown gaunt, his once assured stride reduced to a measured shuffle. His face, when glimpsed by the cameras, bore the traces of pain that no protocol could conceal. In the same breath that announced his deteriorating health, the palace revealed another revelation: the launch of the Diana Initiative by the Prince and Princess of Wales, a sweeping program of reform and compassion, invoking the legacy of the late Princess Diana. It was a gesture that reignited both admiration and unease, illuminating a kingdom poised between remembrance and renewal. For Charles, the irony was cruel. He had waited a lifetime for the crown, only to find it slipping from his grasp just as it began to fit. Behind palace doors, aides spoke in hushed tones of his growing frailty, of nights spent in restless pain, of moments when the monarch, who once painted gardens and championed nature, now found solace only in silence. Photographs from Sandringham showed him leaning heavily on his cane, his eyes distant. It was said that in private he masked his anguish with whiskey and solitude, that even the soft rustle of papers in his study carried the weight of resignation. To the world, he appeared stoic, dutiful. To those who knew him best, he was a man haunted by the burden of legacy, by the absence of his younger son, by the ghosts of history that no sovereign can escape. When the press secretary stepped before the cameras, the tone was grave. The king's condition had progressed, they said gently. The duke reportedly paid millions up front when he secured the property, granting him legal residence even after King Charles cut off his annual financial support following the late queen's death. For the monarch, it's a source of deep frustration. He cannot easily remove his brother without facing legal entanglements or public backlash over royal privileges. Still, the optics are dire. It was a moment thick with symbolism. Diana's spirit rising through her son and daughter-in-law, just as Charles's own strength waned. Social media erupted with tributes. Old footage of Diana hugging sick children, walking through minefields, laughing under the flash of paparazzi lights, resurfaced with aching nostalgia. The people's princess, the world whispered once more. Yet within the palace, the revival of Diana's name stirred unease. For King Charles, it was a reopening of wounds he had long buried. For Queen Camilla, it was a painful reminder that the shadow of Diana could never truly be escaped. Camilla's absence from the initiative's announcement did not go unnoticed. Her silence spoke louder than any denial. At a charity luncheon, she was overheard dismissing the project as symbolic but unnecessary. It was Catherine's calm but firm reply, "This work is about the future we build together," that marked the quiet passing of a torch. In that moment, Catherine was no longer merely the Princess of Wales. She was the embodiment of a monarchy learning to weep and evolve in equal measure. By June, the palace had offered its last optimistic statement about the king's health. "He is managing," said one aide gently, describing a sovereign who insisted on fulfilling engagements even as fatigue hollowed him. "The thing about this illness is you manage it. You live your life as normally as you can." But normal had long become impossible. As the king retreated from public life, his son's presence grew larger. William, once tentative under the weight of expectation, now stood as the monarchy's beating heart. He spoke on behalf of the crown at international gatherings, from Paris to Monaco, echoing his father's causes with a new, youthful conviction. At his side, Catherine radiated calm strength, her poise carrying the quiet reassurance of continuity. Insiders whispered that Clarence House, once the seat of royal power, was no longer the center of decision-making. The pulse of the monarchy now beat from Kensington Palace, where the Waleses held private strategy meetings with advisors, preparing for a future that felt increasingly imminent. "The king wants this to be solved," one confidant said softly, referring not only to family divisions, but to the transition itself, the unspeakable truth that the reign of Charles III was nearing its twilight. Even among the royals, lines had begun to form. Princess Anne, the stalwart of duty, stood by her brother but found herself drifting closer to William and Catherine's vision. Her long-standing frostiness with Camilla, dating back to youthful entanglements and the scandal that once divided the family, had never thawed. At recent events, her decision to allow Camilla to walk ahead was interpreted less as deference than deliberate defiance. Anne, like the nation, sensed a change in the air, the inevitable turning of an ancient wheel. And so, the palace became a house of shadows. Ailing kings, anxious heirs, and unspoken grief filled its corridors. The Diana Initiative, meant to symbolize renewal, had instead exposed the fissures beneath the crown. To some, it was an act of hope. To others, a declaration that the era of Charles was quietly ending. In private moments, the king is said to speak often of legacy, not of crowns or conquests, but of the garden at Highgrove, of trees he planted decades ago that now bloom without his tending. He tells those closest to him that duty has its own poetry, that every monarch must eventually hand the light forward. But those who see him now describe a man diminished, his voice hoarse, his gaze searching for something beyond the reach of earthly honors. Prince Harry's quiet return to London only deepened the sense of unfinished business. His presence stirred both tenderness and turmoil. The king values family above all, one aide confided. He wants peace before it's too late. But reconciliation, like recovery, may come too late for a man whose time is slipping through the seams of history. And so, the story of Charles III unfolds not as a tale of triumph but of transition, a monarch who waited too long for destiny, only to meet it on fragile terms. Around him, the next generation gathers, their youth both promise and burden. William, the reluctant heir, now carries the crown's invisible weight. Catherine, the modern consort, moves through grief with grace, her steady hand on the pulse of a nation learning to let go. The world watches as the sun sets on a reign that was never meant to last this short. The palace stands solemn, its flags at half-mast in spirit if not in sight. And somewhere within its ancient walls, a king prepares to pass the crown not as a symbol of power, but as a final act of love.